Thank you for coming. We have 4 panelists today, and I will introduce them and read their bios. So hold it tight, actually. All right. So first up, I realize I wrote this as in I would call you up, but this is just happening.
Oh, okay. That's
No, this is perfect.
Do you need us
Okay.
to sit in order?
No, but if you just in the jacket with the teal, it's teal, is Zosette Guir, who is a second generation Filipino American and the manager of content operations and production at Detroit Public Television. After receiving her bachelor's degree in communication studies from U of M Ann Arbor, Zosette worked on various production projects in the Metro Detroit area, including Detroit Performs and the 7 Generation River. She has also worked on nationally distributed documentaries such as When I'm 65 and Ride the Tiger. In her current role, she oversees production of One Detroit, which focuses on journalism based on immersive community engagement. She also leads the AAPI advisory panel at Detroit Public Television. She has worked on award-winning productions, honored with awards by the Society of Professional Journalists, Detroit, and MAB, the Michigan Association of Broadcasters. In 2020, she was also named a cohort fellow for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting Editorial Integrity and Leadership Initiative. Welcome, Zosette.
Thank you.
And this is alphabetical order. Next, we have Okyoung Noh, who is an interdisciplinary artist and researcher. She studied at Seoul National University and received professional training in visual art, critical pedagogy, and qualitative research methodologies, and conducted 4 studies internationally, including 1 national research project commissioned by the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art, Korea. Currently, Noh is studying art at U of M Ann Arbor as the Elsie Choi Lee Scholar. Noh worked as a team lead of the Asian Teaching Artist Exchange Workshop and joint project supported by the Korean Art and Culture Education Service and the Ministry of Culture, Sports, and Tourism, and teaching integrative project at the University of Michigan. Welcome, Okyoung. Next, we have Jasmine Rivera. Jasmine is the co-executive director of Rising Voices, a nonprofit organization that seeks to organize and develop the leadership of Asian American women, cis, trans, gender, nonconforming, and femme identifying, and young people for power around progressive values and policy in the state of Michigan. Jasmine is also a director, writer, producer, and actor from Detroit, Michigan. As a narrative filmmaker, she has written, directed, and produced media via her company, Anna Wynn Productions, as well as 4 narrative films, including Nain Rouge, which won thesis honors at Columbia University, numerous awards for Best Short Film and Best Director, and screened at film festivals around the country. Her latest narrative short is American Prophet, set in 1968 Detroit and based on the true story of peacemaker Bishop Thomas Gumbleton. Jasmine is the recipient of the Laureen Arbus Scholarship from the New York Women in Film and Television Organization, was a junior professional media fellow at the United Nations University, and Detroit Sundance Screenwriters Lab Fellow. A recipient of the prestigious 2014 Kresge Arts Fellowship Award, she earned her master's in fine arts and film directing at Columbia University. Welcome, Jasmine. Finally, we have Frances Kai-Hwa Wang, is a journalist, essayist, speaker, activist, and poet focused on issues of diversity, race, culture, and the arts. She is currently a community correspondent for PBS NewsHour, and her reading has appeared at NBC News Asian America, PRI Global Nation, New American Media, Pacific Citizen, Angry Asian Man, and several anthologies, journals, and art exhibitions. She teaches courses on Asian Pacific Islander American media and civil rights at U of M Ann Arbor. She is a 2019 Knights Arts Challenge Detroit winner, Marguerite Casey Foundation Equal Voice Journalism Fellow in Poverty, and Keith Center for Civil Rights Detroit Equity Action Lab Race and Justice Reporting Fellow on Arts and Culture. Welcome, Frances. Frances just recently published a book in 2021 called You Cannot Resist Me When My Hair's in Braids, published by Wayne State University Press. It is available here to purchase for Or some money, I guess. Is it secret? Is it a secret amount? But yes, welcome, Francis. Okay, we're going to start with a number of questions about storytelling as an act of resistance today, and we're going to start with Jasmine, who has a time constraint. This is what happens when I print on double-sided. There we go. Okay, so Jasmine, tell us about Rising Voices' upcoming story banking project. I know that it's premiering next month. In recent years, story banking has become an integral part of progressive advocacy platforms. Why do you think that's the case? What challenges have you faced with this project in getting it started? And what do you hope its successes will be?
Yeah, so Rising Voices is an organization that is meant to build power in the Asian American community, and we do that with multiple pathways. So we do have an electoral program, we have a community organizing program, and we also have a policy program right now. And a lot of that is all integrated into storytelling. Storytelling is so essential for our organization because we reach out to the community, and we are also a reflection of the community. And the only way that we can actually represent folks is to have them come up and offer their testimonials and kind of honor what's going on with them in the world at that moment, so that we can represent them and advocate for their issues. And so the story banking project that we have initially started as a more general sort of kind of story banking with the API community in Michigan, and it remains that way. However, now we are directly focusing it to a particular campaign, which is our Teach Our Histories Ethnic Studies campaign. And so there is a movement in Michigan to gather a lot of different communities, not just the Asian American community, but to promote the ethnic studies bills that will be coming through the legislature this year. And so right now, the focus of our story banking is actually interviewing and talking to people with their experience of education and kind of what it was like to grow up as an Asian American in Michigan, what was missing in your experience, what did you wish that you had, and then this is coming from, you know, students, but also teachers, families, things like that. And it's very powerful, these testimonials, because it really gives context kind of to like the dryness of the advocacy and the policy that we talk about. It gives it that human sort of context to it. And it's something that, that is very relatable. And so we always talk about at Rising Voices with organizing work and in political work as well. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. And so it is the most powerful moving force that there is. Essentially, we can go to people's houses and canvass and talk about, you know, voting until we're blue in the face. But until people are actually relating to the issues and to the other people whom they need to, you know, advocate for or to support in solidarity, nothing moves. And so when we do the storytelling, and not just in terms of this particular project, everything that we do at Rising Voices is hinged on the storytelling sort of aspect. That is the framework that we operate so that we can actually have an authentic response of the community so they can join in and be part of a movement.
Oh, that's great. Are you finding that there's you know, momentum happening in Lansing for the ethnic studies? Because I know you've been working on this for years.
Yes, I mean, there is momentum on our side. It's been a very unique sort of process because certain states, other states in the union have already implemented this, but we're in a different, you know, day right now. So we have the rise of sort of anti-ethnic studies and the CRT fight. And so being able, I think that the most unique thing about Michigan and the effort that's happening right now is that we are doing it in coalition with other communities of color. So we are not advocating solely for Asian American history. And that is happening in other states where advocates are saying, we want API history, we want API history. And that is actually coming to the expense of other communities. And so with the legislators who have introduced these bills, it has been very carefully put together so that we're moving as one voice. And so that, I think, is the key movement that's happening in Lansing.
I mean, that's phenomenal because I just saw today that, you know, on the same day that Ron DeSantis signed anti-Black and anti-trans legislation, he is trying to enact like pro-Asian American, which is weaponizing our communities against communities. So this coalition is, I mean, that
And
sounds
that's
so
where
essential.
storytelling comes into play, right? And so I have, from my personal history, my grandmother came to Detroit in the 1960s. And so when you come to Detroit, you come to a black city. And so that the story of what was happening in Detroit had a direct effect on the Filipino Americans. And so telling those stories is key for people to understand what it is to live in Michigan and in America.
That's fantastic. And because I know you're going to have to leave earlier, would you mind doing a little promotion for Rising Voices of how to find out more about the organization and the work that you all do?
Yeah, no, Rising Voices, you can find us on our website, www.risingvoicesaaf.org. And we are active on social media, Facebook, and other platforms. And also, it's API Heritage Month, and so we have a number of activities that are happening. And actually, this Saturday, we will be having an event in Detroit called the Feast of Resistance. And so that is a potluck sort of celebration. It's a journey through Asian American history through food. And so we totally welcome the public to that event. It's free, and you don't need to bring anything to attend, but it's a wonderful way of kind of synthesizing the history of our different communities with the actual, sharing and breaking of bread and rice and curry and all the things that we like to eat. So I invite you to that as well.
That is great. That's, and I didn't eat dinner, so I'm pass about that. We're going to move on real quick to Zosette.
Okay.
Doing this alphabetically. So Zosette, tell us about the API storytelling series you produce on DPTV and also the advisory committee. Why is it crucial that this series and committee both exist? And how do API people reach out to you if they're interested in participating in either the committee or the storytelling series?
Yeah. No, thanks, Jen. So I do have to go back a little bit in time just to kind of explain the background of both of those things, our API advisory panel and our API stories. And they're very connected, and one kind of led to the other. Actually, the advisory panel led to the stories. But, in 2020, we saw like a spike in anti-Asian hate crimes, and we had a president at that time who threw around the term Kung Flu when talking about COVID. And there was just a lot of scapegoating during the beginning of the pandemic. And then a year later, March 2021, that's when the Atlanta spa shootings happened. And 8 people were killed, including 6 women of Asian descent. And I remember just in the immediate days after, just kind of being really just emotionally affected. And I kind of felt like I could not be the only one feeling that way. And very specifically, I remember I had a doctor's appointment, and I was just scared to go out to it, even though it was not that far away. But it was that noticeable to me. And then I also, at the same time, I just kind of realized, like, I work at a public TV station, and I work with a team that, puts out a news and public affairs show. There's got to be something that we can do, some space that we can provide, because we are public TV as opposed to like commercial TV, which might not allow for the kind of which might not allow for the kind of latitude to maybe create a space. And I also remember talking with my colleague Bill, who some of the folks here know, Bill Kubota. He's Japanese American. He's a documentary filmmaker and a TV producer that I worked very closely with on the show that called One Detroit. And we're just kind of thinking out loud, like, what can we do? And at that same time, Bill and we were going out to the Stop Asian Hate rallies that were going on all around Metro Detroit. And I remember telling Bill that I was really struck by how many people we were seeing. I had never really seen that many Asian Americans kind of in an activist capacity, like seeing them all together and seeing our community like advocating in this way, and not just seeing Asian American and Pacific Islanders, but just all, from all races kind of coming together as well. And while we're out there, we're talking about, there's this API advisory panel that the station had started to, they had started to form back in 2019. right before the pandemic, and Bill and I were talking about maybe that's what we do. We re-engage this group, and we had also started coming across just new people that we hadn't met before, who were really wanting, or we found really interesting, and we wanted to invite them to also be a part of this AAPI advisory panel that we are re-engaging, and we did invite them to like this first meeting. It was a virtual meeting, and so we held it, and it was a virtual one. It was just a check-in, just to see how everybody was, and there were people, you know, from advocacy groups, people like yourself and Francis, and you know, ACJ, and educators. Like it was really just, for me personally, a very healing thing to experience. And we just asked the question, you know, what can, you know, me and Bill and our head of content and our CEO and, you know, the executive team at DBTV was there, and all together we were just kind of asking, you know, we're your public TV station. What can we do to serve the API community at this time when there's just a lot of fear out there? And the answer was pretty clear. There are many people who came forth and gave great insights, but the main things were that Asian Americans are often depicted as an invisible minority, you know, and there was a great desire to have more stories out there that really reflected the authentic experiences of the community, and they wanted to see more stories that showed the diversity, the history, and to let the people within the community speak and to be the center of the story. So that guidance has been the primary set of guardrails for everything that we've been doing. Another person who was in that meeting is a friend of mine, Dorothy Hernandez. She's a journalist. At that time, she was with WDET, which is, you know, the local NPR station in Detroit. And we'd also run into each other, kind of covering the Stop Asian Hate rallies. And we were also starting to talk, you know, maybe there's something we can do. Maybe there's something both of our stations can do. Maybe you do an audio part, and I'm TV, so I'll do something TV related. And after the meeting, she reached out, and we decided to take on this storytelling project together. And you know, like I was saying before, like she would do a radio version, I would do a broadcast version for One Detroit. And we kind of started to think about, okay, so what does that mean, right? I think, and we talked about, you know, what was the purpose of what we were doing and what kind of, you know, stories we're wanting to share through this project. And, you know, so many times, you know, we were talking about this, certain communities they just get attention when terrible things happen. And then the headlines change, and then the attention turns away. But we really wanted to focus on stories that showed just the everyday experiences of the API communities here in Metro Detroit. Just to show the everyday joys and struggles of what it is to be here, to be living in this particular part of the Midwest. And we also admired the StoryCorps model so much because there's a certain level of intimacy and connection that's so tangible in that. And so we wanted to involve pairings of people as opposed to like single, you know, sit-down interviews with someone, and to show people who kind of had that connection already, just because it might allow for the people that were having like the conversation to relate to each other more easily, and to kind of help draw each other out in a more kind of organic way. And it could be any combination. It could be friends, it could be, you know, significant others, it could be mentors and mentees, family members, whatever, what have you. And I think when you show a conversation with people who already have a connection to each other, I think it does something for the audience too. It kind of allows them to feel invited, you know, to settle in. And again, it's comforting for the people who are already in it because there's somebody there. The other person on the other end knows them, you know, so And we also talked about, for those participating, they both didn't have to be Asian American. Obviously, one of them did have to be, but is because we wanted to show, in the Midwest, I think we're interacting across racial lines all the time, and it's a way to show just solidarity, and that's how it happens, So we did our first round of stories in 2021, and we released them in May, and for AAPI Heritage Month, and they included stories about, an interracial couple kind of dealing with their cultural differences. We also had a story about a Filipino adoptee's search for his biological mother, and we also featured one with Chen talking to his friend about how their conversations during the pandemic got more in depth after George Floyd's murder. And the series continues. It's still on. It's still going on this year. Dorothy, actually, she works for the Detroit News now, but we talk about kind of repartnering up in a different way in the future. And for now, it's me and Bill working on these. And this month, we've got 3 new conversations that we've been featuring on One Detroit every week. And the newest one is going to be airing tomorrow night at 7:30 on One Detroit on Detroit Public TV. And that story and all of the others will be on onedetroitpbs.org afterwards. And sorry, there's a lot of that. But why it's crucial. So I think it's crucial because the threat of anti-Asian hate hasn't gone away, right? And we're still seen as perpetual foreigners. We're still subject to being othered, to being dehumanized, and as are communities of color in general. And my parents' generation, I think I don't necessarily know if they had the luxury of being able to delve into the things that they had to carry, and I think it's from my perspective, when I think of my parents' generation, there's so much that they endured but didn't talk about, perhaps, and there's a variety of reasons for that, but because I think basically they're just trying to survive, just to live and provide. But I think we're in a time now that it's been marked with a lot of fear and a lot of violence and a lot of uncertainty, and I think those in the AAPI community have realized that staying silent has offered no protection. And to be visible and to use our voices in concert is really the way forward. And I got into TV because I never saw many people like me on TV, and I thought maybe if I get into it, maybe I'll have a positive impact, and some other young child won't have that experience, right? But I think it's very important for us to be visible, especially in the media, and not only being visible, but I think it's important for those within the community to be active participants in sharing their stories and defining their experiences, and not just when something terrible happens, right? Or even exceptionally amazing happens. Just, I'm kind of the mindset that things that happen in the everyday are valuable and valid, and it's important to show just kind of existence and to say that your existence as it is valuable. And to show those things, all those things, that's what I hope that that's the kind of opportunity I hope this series provides.
One thing I've noticed with the storytelling series is that what I really admire is that you and Bill have been able to present them in all their complications, these relationships. Just recently you had a father and son, one who's an artist and coming into, who I think is pretty clearly was resistant to their identity as an Asian American, and his father, and that conversation, and it was just really honest. And I just really appreciated seeing that, because I think there's also a tendency sometimes where you want to present the best of the community instead of, and not to say it has to be ugly, but it's complicated. We had Mary Commodore here on 2 days ago talking about like she was a survivor of the Japanese internment camps, and she was talking about how there's basically this, cloud of silence that kind of covers a lot of the people who survived that, especially the first generations, and how there was this kind of like atmosphere of shame and silence around it, of having survived that. And while that I think is perfectly understandable from just a human empathy level, it's also impossible not to feel this deep sense of loss for all the stories and the history that, you know, is now lost in time. So the work that you're doing with AAPI storytelling, I think, is essential. And I just hope that keeps, you know, going, and, you know, that there's the diversity. Who is it on like the premiering tomorrow? What are the?
It's actually someone Jasmine introduced me to. It's
great.
Writer and artist Jack Chang and his friend Paul Pham.
Oh, great.
So,
What's
yeah.
the? Well, sorry, do you remember what's the theme of this one?
Oh, there's a lot, but they talk about, you know, meeting in Detroit and belonging, and and their definitions of Asian Americanness, and how it sometimes feels like a state of in-betweenness all the time. And also just talking about, you know, their family histories and the lives of even their parents, and also the intersection of, you know, being Asian American, how it sometimes causes a kind of friction when you want to, maybe you're instilled to do something that's financially stable, but you have these creative inclinations, and sometimes you get a message from your parents that's like, oh, it's okay to try it, but don't go too far in that direction, you know? So there's a lot of things, but it's a good conversation.
Yeah, see, complicated and enriching.
Yeah.
So tomorrow night.
Tomorrow night, one of the segments will be run on One Detroit, and then the rest of the segments, along with the one that's broadcast, will be online afterwards.
On YouTube, correct?
On YouTube, yep, and on our website, onedetroitpbs.org.
Thank you. Thank you, Zosette.
Thank you.
Okyoung, moving on to you. Your art seems to focus on how otherness is defined in this country, but also, just as importantly, how it can be subverted. You recently premiered last week a performance called Asian Love Tour with Chien-An Yuan, artist out of Pittsburgh, which confronted, which I attended, and it just confronts a very complicated narrative of you know, how Asian women are, I think, essentially attacked online and like sexualized, and it was powerful and honest and subversive. Yeah. One through line in your art, I think, is, you know, the interviewing subjects to get a lot of the first person narratives and extracting insights and stories from them. Why do you see, you know, those elements as being so critical in your creative practice?
Thank you for the great question. Yeah, I really think it's very important to kind of like we collect a lot of different kinds of narratives, especially if the narratives of the communities where we belong. And it's also important, like kind of like, you know, not being an observer, because it's the stories of our community. So like I just naturally like started from, you know, my struggles in the communities where I belong. And then I think I'm kind of like expand this, you know, curiosities towards other stories. I think it's also because like I found my story is not only about like struggles and then, you know, like struggles, fighting, conflicts, and, you know, all the bad things, but also at the same time, like, you know, struggling itself can be kind of the stories of, you know, the stories which implies the potentials which we can say like to resist, or like potentials to testimony, you know, testify some things around these communities and so on. So yeah, I started from South Korean young female generations, and then especially those struggling like young generation females. And then when I came to the United States, I kind of like looked into what kind of stories were surrounding us, and then like how the stories, you know, how I interpret these stories, but at the same time how these people, you know, kind of like perceive their surroundings and then perceptions around them, and then especially like narratives, linguistic struggles, and how they kind of like, how they want to share these stories with other communities. So yeah, this happened, and then I kind of appreciate that I got privileged to be a kind of like interviewers, but at the same time, like nowadays I'm trying to be more like, I'm also trying to be a narrator of my stories also, because like documenting other stories always like comes to my stories, because like neighbor stories can be also your stories. So yeah, it's kind of like going back and forth between my neighbor stories and my stories. Yeah.
And what do you find within the interview process that can really inform the artwork because I think like having those first person narratives, the piece that you did with the map. And what is that piece called? The one that was that just premiered at the University of Michigan. With the different items representing the country. Can you tell us about that piece?
So now I feel my community is kind of like Asian newcomers to the United States who are living nearby me, and then I started doing an interview with them, and then I wanted to kind of like ask their opinions about like what is the American or American like. So what do they think about like what is this whole weird big entity of the United States, and then they all have their own ideas about the United States, American or American-like, and then that's how they decided to come to the United States and then begin the new life. So it was very interesting because this story shows like kind of like their kind of like desires or dreams, or kind of like very positive, projections around the United States, but at the same time, it shows their struggles and conflicts. And then one of the most like inspiring story for me was about like yellow bottle, one water bottle. Like one girl from China told me like she bought the water bottle, like she brought the water bottle from China, but she realized the size is too small compared to other people's water bottles on the tables. But like if you're a student, you always need to go to the class and then like see like how other people kind of like have the specific objects, and then she wanted to assimilate into that landscape of the classroom, and then she bought the same brand, same sized, same colored water bottles with other people. And then this story was kind of like showing a lot of complicated, dynamics around, newcomers, Asian newcomers, and then like communities where I belong, their stories. So yeah, I really appreciate that story.
Yeah, it was fascinating, especially that one, how she remarked about the size of the water bottle, of like, and the one that she chose of just, I think like, we think about hydration as such an American thing of like competing large sizes of water bottle. I went to the doctor's office and it looked like one of the receptionists had one of those, like the water bottle dispensers that you tip upside down.
Yeah.
But it was half of that, and it was this like jug. And it was this challenge of 12 cups of water a day. And I was like, 12 cups? Like, who can do that? But it was like, but hydration in some ways becomes aspirational.
Yeah.
And there's this level of like, what I found interesting is that all the items that people picked out had a level of the American dream behind them. And what was illuminating about your piece was, when you're in this country and within the cultural hegemony, you don't see the outsider perspective. You don't even think about it. Everything, just becomes part of, the American compressed culture. And so when you actually see how people see the size of our potato chip bags or the size of the water bottles, it's like shocking because you're suddenly reminded of your own, subjectivity. And I was like, yeah, the water bottles are insane. They're like, they just get bigger and bigger. And I found it, but what I love about it too is that there's a level of humor behind it because it's, I think we need that to survive as well. So the subversion is, I think a key part of it. So thank you. Francis, in addition to your poetry, prose, and journalism, and again, your book, You Cannot Resist Me in Braids, published by Wayne State University Press last year, available after this program, you teach a class called Writing to Save the World. This class description reads that it, quote, aspires to clarify the change you want to see and to create that change in the world with the written word, unquote. What is it about storytelling and writing that offers people such clarity as opposed to other artistic mediums?
Thanks, that's a great question. I write, as a writer, I write in a lot of different forms, and my favorite form is essay. And I write a lot of essays, and I used to write a column. And as a columnist, I'm just telling stories, right, about my family and what we're doing. And today we went to the Dinosaur Museum, then we went to the Ann Arbor District Library, and we looked at the fish, and, et cetera, et cetera. But then I found that it's not just stories, because anyone can tell stories, but then I would find some connection to the issues of the day, or to some, greater theme. And I was able to create these really interesting essays. And so when I started teaching writing at the community college, I teach, memoir classes and, finding your voice and, different kinds of writing. This one I held on to for a little bit, and then at the end, it's like, this is my favorite kind of writing. Why am I not teaching a class on this? And so it originally was called Writing to Change the World, because I didn't want to be too ambitious, and I didn't want to overpromise, and I wanted to make space for people of different political ideologies, right? And then after I taught it a few years, I became more confident. It's like, wait, why do we only want to change the world? Of course we want to save it, right? You don't want to change it in a bad way. Well, some people might. Chien might. But,
Fair. It's fair.
But, so let's do Writing to Save the World. And so it's a social justice themed writing class. I mean, all my writing classes are the same. I probably shouldn't say that out loud. But what we do is we write and then we read to each other. And I offer a lot of different kinds of prompts, writing prompts, so that people can try different things and see what works for them, because everyone's different. And so all the prompts are social justice themed, and they're talking about your values, the things that are important to you, the stories that are important to you, and different ways of talking to different people. Like this is my favorite one, is talk about an issue you care about and try to persuade the person, but the person is your grandmother or your grandfather or your auntie or uncle or someone, of a very different than you. How do you persuade them and talk about, especially if you're into like really complex issues, how do you make it so that other people can understand? And that's that's everyone's homework assignment. And so that's what I do in my class, and we have a lot of fun. And I think for the people who come to this class, actually I taught it yesterday at Rackham Graduate School at the University of Michigan. And I think what writing offers and storytelling offers is a chance to share your own stories, right? And you could share your stories in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different genres, but writing and also speaking is very accessible, right? We all write every day. We all talk to people every day. We write, we tell stories every day. And there's like there's an old book from the 70s. If you can talk, you can write. And so I think, that writing is very accessible, and writing offers a lot of different forms. Like, you don't have to write a big, thick book that's gonna, sit in the library and, sorry, librarians. But maybe, right, you could, right? If you can do it, you can write, one of those big, thick biographies, 300 pages, and it'll be a bestseller. If you're famous, it'll sell. But sometimes you have to go through a lot of gatekeepers to get there. So maybe you don't write a book. You write an article, and it goes into a magazine. If that's too much, maybe you write a poem. Maybe you write something small. Or, then there's ways you can distribute these independently. You can make posters, you can make T-shirts, you could write things on cards and leave them on cafe tables in coffee shops. I've done that. But, there's different ways you can do this in a way that fits you and fits your message, and it's infinitely adaptable. And then this is how you connect to other people, right? We all have a lot of similarities and differences, whatever our backgrounds. There's some connection, there's some similarity. And by telling our stories, we find out about each other, and we find about people who are different than us, and we find people who are the same as us, so we don't feel alone. We feel this connection, we feel community. And wouldn't that be better, right? And then that's how we're gonna save the world or change the world. And what else? And the key to these essays that you always end with like some sort of call to action, right? What do you want to have happen next? Because I think people, if you tell someone about something that's important to you, and that you bring them into their story and they connect with you, they want to help. I think it's very natural for people to want to help and be a part of your world, but they don't know what to do. So offer them some options, right? When I do public speaking, I always offer like a range of options. Something that is very easy to do, go vote, right? Something that is harder to do, go run for office, say. Something that some people can do, donate money, right? And so you have a lot of options, and people can find a way. And there you go, right? We can engineer this, and that's anything else. Yeah. So and this is going to be the name of my next book, Writing to Save the World. I think it'll be fun. It'll be exercise in writing and saving the world. It'll be great.
What year does that come out?
I haven't started writing it. I started it during the pandemic, actually. So I've got like 6 chapters done.
So the answer is coming soon.
Coming soon.
But one thing I've noticed, and one thing that I admire about all 4 of your works and your practices and organizations, is that I think the core through line of what the 4 of you all do is empathy. And empathy is almost the core of it, and the way that you confront that, and the way that you use empathy to, meaning like using empathy to confront difficult topics. What you're saying with, Francis, what you're saying with, bringing people and having them want to help, I think that's it. It's always comes down to empathy, of that suddenly a light switch turns on, for them to understand other people's experiences. What have you found have there been any surprises in this writing class of yours? Any anecdotes that are library appropriate anecdotes about your writing class? Because I know you got stories, Francis. You told me some that really kind of illustrate what you're talking about and how people can be empowered by telling their own story.
I'm trying to think. I have FERPA laws to adhere to, so I'm trying to think. Well, the interesting thing about my class, and this doesn't exactly answer your question, but sort of, because since the pandemic, we've been on Zoom, and word has gotten out, and so people, because this is a community college, right? It's normally people in town that take it, right? And I have a lot of seniors in my classes because of the way they have great scholarships at Washtenaw Community College, and but when word has gotten out, so because we're on Zoom, I have students from Paris and San Francisco and Hawaii and North Africa, South Africa. It's like amazing to me. I'm like completely surprised, and people are coming to take my classes, and they're interacting with the people in the class, and becoming friends, finding connection. And can I say this? Yeah, one of the students is from another state and happened to pass through Michigan, stopped by, we put the word out, and everyone came to meet him in downtown Ann Arbor coffee shop because he was from another state and just happened to be here for some business thing. And everyone's so excited to meet him in real life. And those connections would never have happened without without this class.
I think actually that's almost like the elephant in the room too, is how much of, I think this drive for empathy now comes from us going through the pandemic. I think of everyone I know struggled in some capacity during the pandemic. I think it's impossible to have not to. And I think one thing with Zoom and all the Zoom meetings I was a part of, so many Zoom meetings I was a part of, but that you would find that people were really looking for authentic connection, you know, and that one thing with the pandemic amongst all the other issues is that it kind of revealed that what we thought we had as social and emotional connections prior to it, that you really have to work for them, you know? And then once we're isolated from each other, that you really realize like where do you really have strength and bonds with your like friends, family, and community. And I think all the work that you're doing kind of is, I wouldn't say is in response to that, but is, you know, a lot of that momentum kind of carries from it too, is like that the real authentic, empathetic connection is something that, you know, so many things I think when we drop the ball on post-pandemic as a society, but that's at least one thing where I see artists and producers and writers and, you know, organizations have been able to like laser focus on, which is, you know, I think with the ethnic studies too, is like people finally they finally kind of understand the point of it, you know. But I think that is one thing is, you know, part of this is too like the ethical considerations of this, right? Is like when you're gathering stories from all types of people, like what are kind of the challenges or the considerations that you have to like implement, you know, when you're doing story banking or collecting stories or in your writing and artwork? Or I could ask another question.
No, that's a good question. Who wants to go first?
I have a short answer, but
Yes.
you know, if you're collecting, if you're telling stories that involve other people, there is some sort of responsibility towards those other people and those other people's stories. So but at the same time, you're there too, so it's your story, and so you know you have every right to tell your story, but just be, you know, that's one of the concerns and cautions, to be careful about how you include other people or not include other people. And yeah, right? That was the question. So sometimes people write, especially like in memoir class, they say, oh, what will people think? What will my family think? What will they, you know, will they come after, you know, be mad? And I'm like, well, you can always just challenge them to write their own story, right? You tell your version, like especially in big families, right? This happens a lot for memoir in big families, because one person is 11 when whatever it happened, and the other one was 3 years old, and they see the same event from very different perspectives. And so it would be great if, you know, everyone from the family like told the story from different points of view. Actually, we do that informally in my family. Like all the kids say, no, this is what happened. No, that's what happened. And so that's one way to mitigate that concern.
Yeah, thank you.
I can also add one more. Like I think Francis talked about kind of like, you know, concerns of misrepresentations of, you know, interviewees or narrators, because we actually, like, as a story, you know, archivist, we are the one who are responsible for archiving the stories and then representing the stories, and then like what kind of platforms we will choose, what kind of mediums we will choose. But also, like, I think there's a kind of like difficulty, especially when you want to visit the hard and difficult stories. Like, I mean, like, for the performance you shortly mentioned, like, in the performance, we wanted to revisit the kind of like hypersexualization and fetishization of Asian female bodies in online communities. And then, and also we kind of like dealt with like the mail order bride sites, Reddits, and 4chans, you know, those kind of, you know, very difficult communities. And then like we also wanted to kind of like, you know, collect the stories around like how these online things affects the real bodies, how it affects our psychologies, our bodies, our perception of reality, and romance and relationship and so on. But it's very difficult stories, and then sometimes like it can be traumatic memories. In that kind of difficult situation, I just usually choose visiting my own stories, not other stories, just because I feel myself like I cannot responsible for those kind of traumatic memory evoking story archiving. But yeah, I'm curious like how others people thinks about it.
I think for the AAPI stories, so both of the people that participate in the conversations, there's an act of bravery in choosing to sit down in front of a bunch of cameras, because there are cameras.
Yes.
No doubt. There's lights too, and there's audio equipment, and there's me and Bill,
Yeah.
and what they're choosing to share, they're being very vulnerable. And so, we've kind of developed a process where when it comes time for, we're nearing the airing of their particular story, we do now share the transcripts of what the sections that we choose and give the participants the option to tell us, I'm not comfortable with sharing this any longer. Because there's a bit of time that passes and they may change their minds. And it's different, like, Bill and I also do news stories sometimes, but this feels like a very different thing. This is story as opposed to like a newscast. We would never do that for like a politician and give them a transcript and say, tell us what you're uncomfortable sharing. Like that's not how that works. But this is a very different kind of animal. So, and that's a practice we want to, we're going to carry forward, but it just felt like the right thing to say, you have a choice. This is a brave thing that you're doing, and it's still your choice if you want it to proceed or not, and we'll respond to that.
Yeah, I would say the same thing for Rising Voices, is trying to be very careful about the clearly articulating kind of the purpose of what we're doing and where the material might end up, and then kind of having multiple conversations along the way, from before the interview and then during and then after, in the same way that we're checking in with folks to see if they are comfortable with what they are giving us. And so I think that's part of that ethical practice that we need to apply to this type of work.
Yeah, and the caution, I think, is storytelling for AAPI communities doesn't, being public doesn't always come easy for the community. So like, the care in bringing this as being a more hopefully commonplace practice, because I think that's something, my grandparents all experienced high amounts of wartime trauma, and I'm 45 now, and I know that 99% of those stories are lost. And I get snippets and fragments from other family members about what happened, but at the end of the day, it's like, I have to, like, my cousins and I all have to kind of accept that it's just, we have to just move on, because look, we have to think about our generation, our children's generation, and preserving those stories. Because I tried to do a interview thing with it did not happen. It was like DOA, and I understood it, and I expected that. But and Jasmine, I know you gotta go. So.
I do need to leave, but just in a quick
Yeah.
response to that, I think also the other side of that, so for example, with the work that Rising Voices does with election protection, and so a lot of the conversation that happened around the elections and sort of trying to get the Asian American community activated on that, we were dealing with a lot with other sort of movement groups who wanted to keep on pushing this narrative of they're going to steal the election, there's going to be trouble where the government is going to do this, not realizing that in the Asian community, as what you're talking about, there are very specific experiences that our families have gone through in home countries where you have had coups and revolutions and things like that. And so being careful not to use stories to incite fear into activation, right? And so I think that's part of the care and keeping of our community, which is how do we talk about things that can bring up very specific traumas for us. I do have to leave. I'm so sorry. This was a great
Safe
panel,
travels
but thank
to
you.
Lansing. Yeah.
Thanks, Jasmine.
Good trip. Okay, and actually, that's one thing too, is just like what, going back to the family and what Jasmine's talking about is like the things that kind of define a family's history or define a community's history. It does help younger generations understand their experiences more, and that's one thing is the fragments that I found out about my family, it explains a lot of behaviors. It explains a lot of choices that were made in our history. And that's what I hope for my children's generation, that they'll be able to have, with story banking and be able to see these stories and to kind of understand the experiences of like the AAPI diaspora here. Because without it, you're just kind of guessing of like, why was that verboten? Why was that? And it's like, oh, because it all trickles down, and generational trauma is real. It's a real thing, So moving on, next question is looking to the future. Is what are your ultimate goals with your projects, with your storytelling projects? Like what would be the ideal future for how our communities and storytelling can intertwine? Like, what does that look like to you? Let's be utopian for a second.
Let's go there.
Let's go there. Let's do it. Let's talk about ideals and dreams.
Well, I think for the API stories, I would love this model to be used, throughout the station for other groups. We have American Black Journal. We have, it doesn't even have to be necessarily tied to just a certain ethnicity or race. It can be, I think it's just a nice setup, that is my ultimate hope. It goes beyond the API stories framework. But I've really, it's an enjoyable project to work on, very meaningful, and I'm so grateful for the people who do participate in it and support it and being so forthcoming and transparent. Yeah.
Right? Francis, Okyoung?
I teach a class called Writing to Save the World. So
Save the world.
the goal is kind of to save the world,
Yes.
but also to have more people feel comfortable with telling their stories, writing their stories, sharing their stories, finding connection with each other and community with each other, overcoming barriers, and also thinking about, this is it's a little cliche, right? But Aristotle's "the unexamined life is not worth living," right? So have people think and reflect and think about how to make the world better, right? I always joke I'm the daughter of an engineer. I was trained, from childhood how to think logically like an engineer, but unfortunately wasn't drilled so much on the math skills, so I can't do the math. But I do think like an engineer, like any sort of thing. I always how do we problem solve this? And whether it's an event or whether it's some sort of relationship or how things are arranged, how the chairs are arranged in the room, that sort of thing, right? I'm always thinking, how do we make this better, more efficient, more, especially, and so why not this, right? Let's do this and make things better for all of us.
Great.
I actually do not have much of big ideas about work in the day. But I do think a lot about me and my neighbors, my friends, my families, and then how it would impact their subjectivity, and then their kind of self-definition, I would say. I was just thinking about what's the meaning of narrating one's stories, and then what is the meaning of revisiting their past and their memories and then their experience, and then how this process helps them redefine themselves and then redefine their communities and then redefine their history. So I felt like it's kind of like the act of expanding the communities and then solidarity. But at the same time, it sometimes provokes some critical questions about oneself and communities, and also, like from the different perspectives, it can be, it can raise a lot of different questions, and I really appreciate all kinds of processes, because this is kind of like true moment of thinking about the value of stories and value of narrations, and then what's the meaning of having a lot of narrators who dare speaks about themselves, and then kind of like defining their past, and then like revisiting their memories. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that just in this age of information, that in this age of surveillance, that the work that you all do with the storytelling is a way of fighting back a little, because we're entering this time where, the voices that are being amplified on platforms, on like social media platforms, are not the voices that are the healthiest, for basically, I think for humanity, really. It's like the things that we talk about have become normalized. There's this, I want to say potential damage, but has been damaging. Coming to what Jasmine was saying, like those voices of those kind of narratives that are driving of the anger and of the anger, rage, and then like angry subversion or damaging subversion, and being able to, like, for the work that you're doing, is just being able to lock into that empathy. Empathy is almost for lack of a better term, like the weapon that we can use to fight back. So thank you for the work that you all do. But I think it's a good time to open up for Q&A. Right. Any questions? You want to hold the mic? Yes. Okay. Here.
When I was going to school, the last 10 years, I was at Eastern, and there were a lot of Asians, and I was exploratory. I thought they were in a context where they were smarter in math, smarter in science than, I say, blacks. But I was an econ major, and at that time, there was not a lot of Trump ideology out. It was like given the right to speak, right, say, and act the way they want in their own community. I'm like, well, I thought they did that. I was just like sincere about that. But my professor says, no, they have just as much right as anyone. They come here, they're citizens and will be citizens. And so I think your perception of something has been mistreated. Yes, I think that there's a group of people who want to have what you have, but not be less than what you have. Those people will always attack for something that you already have. We're confronted with the same thing. They don't want to be less. They always want to be more. So if you can tell your story with these stories, I'm pretty sure you can get it out. I'm pretty sure. So my question is, have you ever learned about the Civil Rights Administration in Lansing, about the Asian Pacific Commission? And if you have you spoke with anyone that's in charge of that office? Because they have a lot of offices around Michigan that will let Asians know what they can get from Michigan or the federal possibilities, not only just speaking out, but your entitlements as they are. Sometimes the laws are not interpreted to understand from all points of view. But you have a lot of rights, and you have a lot of the right to speak out. So I just want you to know from econ point of view, America's going to move forward, and they're going to move forward at a very fast pace. And of course, you may feel left out, but they're not leaving you out. There's nobody to speak. You have the right to speak, to say, and do. Let them know. Let them really know. Write your senators. Let them know. And they will address the problems.
Thank you so much.
So I just want to know, did you feel like you were left out? Sometimes they had a cutoff, and some people feel like they're cut off. And did you feel that way? Did they feel cut off?
Well, Michigan has the governor has an advisory commission. It's called the Michigan Asian Pacific American Advisory Commission, and they work very closely with the Michigan Civil Rights Commission. So if folks have problems, they can come up, and then these commissioners are people from the community, and so you can talk to them and work with them.
This commission that is in Atlanta is addressed only to Asia Pacific. We don't have that. We have civil rights. We have civil rights. But they're both the same civil rights. They're federal laws. But in Michigan, there's a commission office for Asian American Islanders.
Absolutely. So we're going to actually move on to the next question because we are running out of time. I'm very sorry. And do we have any other questions from the in-person audience?
Yes, right here.
Wonderful.
So I was gonna say, like, how do you go about looking for the stories that you want to tell? And do you ever feel like you have trouble finding a good story to tell? Or does it always seem like there's too many things out there that you need to tell that you don't have time for?
Okay. That's
That's a great question.
it is a great question.
Yeah. I mean, I think for the AAPI stories, it's always been one person leads us to another person, leads us to another person. It's this person has a great story, you got to talk to them. And then you do a pre-interview and find out what that story might be and see if it's a good fit on both ends, and then proceed. But yeah, it's been mainly that way for the API stories. And I think showing what they are and keeping it going has hopefully made people more open to participating. Like, that could be you, that could be you sharing your story, and it's okay because you see other people doing it.
Yeah, for me, I'm a journalist, and as a journalist, I write articles that are objective and balanced, and not leaning any particular way and not pushing people towards any opinion. In my essays, I can do that, but in my like normal reporting journalism, I don't do that. I cannot do that. But we're also people, right? Journalists are people. The idea that a journalist is completely objective is just not true. But it can't go into the article. But if you're, and journalists also deal with some really difficult stories sometimes. And so where do you, when these emotions well up in you, where do you put them? And so that's where I put them into my prose poetry and lyric essay and have them go in this other direction. And there you can, reference the current events that are going on, but you can take it in a different direction. And then what I've also found is then taking some of these and making them into art is so satisfying, because then you reach people in another way, in a different genre. And that's some of the things, for example, that's what we do with Island, Asian American Performance Arts Performance Collaborative, which is a group that Chien and I are in, and we combine poetry and dance, movement, music, lighting, visual design, and you bring people in at different levels. People who understand dance are moved by the dance, people who understand poetry are moved by the poetry, and it all comes together in this beautiful package. And it's a great way to express this and meet people in a different way.
Speaking of which, this Saturday at 6 p.m. is going to be the premiere of Kizuna Tree, which is a storytelling and movement-based performance featuring both Francis and Zosette. And it will be this Saturday at 6 p.m., so please come, and it should be a fun time. Yeah. But I think we're going to wrap it up. I want to thank the three of you and Jasmine, of course, for coming here and sharing your experiences and your processes and your practices with us. The work you all do, I think, is absolutely essential for all communities. And yes, thank you, and please continue what you do. Thank you. And thank you to the library. Thank you to Journey. Thank you to Tyler. Thank you for having us.
We love the Ann Arbor District Library.
Thank you very much. As Chen said, we do have that performance this weekend. And don't forget to check our website for any further performances and pieces this Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. There we go, got the words out. Have a great one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.